Welcome to The Rania Show. I'm your host, Rania, and each week we have a story to share with you, whether it's mine or our guests. Tune in as we discuss trauma, manifestation, and everything in between. Welcome back. So grateful that you're here. Let's get started. Today's episode is about having the same amount, if not more, of faith in yourself as you would in your external environment. And the example that I decided to share with you today is about elevators. So, you have more faith in an elevator than you have in yourself. And that wasn't self taught, that was taught through the practice of permission. You don't even think about it anymore. You just get on an elevator with full faith that it will bring you to your destination. Because growing up, your caretaker didn't give you a reason to question your faith in the elevator. And they even let you press the up and down button, and you ran to that button out of pure excitement to see who would get to it first. And then the ding sound goes off, and the elevator reaches your floor, doors open wide to scoop you up. You step in, look for the buttons that hold your destination, ask your caretaker which button to press, and then the doors slide closed, and now you're in pursuit of your next destination. We grew up having more faith in an elevator than we did in ourselves. For example, we would go to Lebanon in the summer, and the electricity was not the most stable resource we had. And chances were the electricity would go out while you were riding said elevator. And chances are you might be in there for a while. But we also lived on the 9th floor, and each flight of stairs was equivalent to 2 flights of stairs. So, depending on how quickly you wanted to get up there, yeah, we put a lot of faith in that elevator to get us to our destination every single day in the summer. Now, as an adult, you don't ask for permission to ride the elevator because that permission has been granted to you over and over and over again for years. You've earned it. However, you are still asking for permission outside of that elevator. You are now asking for permission from your external environment. You're asking for permission for which elevator to ride, where the location is, whether it's in your apartment building, the mall, state, country. It's all permission based. For example, your apartment building. Where is it located? Where does the income to support it come from? How many hours do you put in for that income? Is that income capped based on your title? Do you enjoy what you do, or did you do it based on the salary? Think about when you were a kid and your alarm would go off, or your caretaker would come in to wake you up, and you just kept asking for 5 more minutes, or can I stay home today? I'm really not feeling well. And then you go to school because they didn't believe you. And then at school, what did you ask for? The bathroom, lunch, extra credit. We got so used to asking for permission from everyone else but ourselves to the point where it almost feels wrong or icky. So we wait for permission to think outside of the box, permission to speak, permission to be promoted, permission to graduate, permission to take a sick day, permission to go on vacation. And then what about when you're being yourself and you get told to tone it down? Or you should be more like your cousin. Look at how she treats her parents. Or girls shouldn't talk like that. Or like boys need to toughen up and stop being so feminine and weak. Said to you enough times, and you will start hesitating every time you want to make a decision. Asking for permission to let parts of yourself be seen and heard. And then, if permission is denied, then you look to others to tell you what parts of yourself should be seen and heard in order to fit in. Our desires are there because they are ours, but we don't have enough faith in ourselves to fulfill them because we're still waiting for permission to follow through on them out of fear of failure, of being told, see, I told you so. But the more we continue to wait for permission, the more stressed we become, the more overwhelmed we become, the more burnt out we become. And then stress turns into physical and mental ailment because we're waiting for permission to process our own being, our own self, and what we went through from our childhood, from generational. And then that turns into depression, PTSD, hair loss, weight loss or gain, cancer, digestive issues, and inflammation, just to name a few. For example, on last week's episode, Marisol talked about having breast cancer and going back to work 3 days after surgery. And that it took cancer to bring her awareness to how she was managing her life, asking for permission, to realize that it wasn't working for her anymore and that things needed to change. And then she allowed herself to feel and be. And through that, she sought support from therapy, Facebook groups, and social media, and then had conversations with people that are going through the same things that she is. For example, I grew up like wanting to be sick because that was the only time I felt safe to rest. It was the only time I had permission to slow down and rest. Otherwise, it was seen as being lazy or dramatic. And then as an adult, being sick wasn't enough to get granted permission. I had to keep going though. Like it was to point of burnout, overwhelm, and stress. And then that produced physical and mental ailment to the point of quite literally becoming paralyzed temporarily, thank God, to get me to slow down, be still, and rest. And I wish it didn't have to get to that, but at the same time, there's gratitude in what happened because going through that experience is what brought me to resources and tools that I still use until today. And I'm still processing, but because I started digging into the layers of emotions I was holding on to, I started discovering and rediscovering parts of myself and realizing that the only permission I ever needed was my own. So I invite you to take a moment and think about what parts of your life, what areas are you still waiting on permission for? And when did you stop having faith in yourself to reach your own destination rather than others? Then ask yourself, how's it currently showing up in my life, both physically and mentally? Sitting with the temporary discomfort now might actually save you from having to come face to face with it down the line while having to deal with the hardships that show up physically and mentally. And then it'll help you rediscover parts of yourself or discover parts of yourself that you didn't even know were there. And by doing so, you start to notice where you're asking for permission, where you're showing up. How do you feel when you show up in different aspects of your life? So please take the time, just sit with yourself, all parts of yourself, and acknowledge them because they're a part of who you are. And if you're ignoring who you are, then how are you paying attention to everything that you want in your external environment if you're not acknowledging your internal environment? Thank you for tuning in, and I will see you next week. I hope you have a wonderful week. Bye.